In this video, I'm going to walk through setting up an ERDDAP server using a Docker image, following the instructions in the iUse gold standard ERDDAP repo. Now, this is a follow-along tutorial. So in the description of this video, you'll find links to all of the resources we use, as well as all of the commands that I'm going to run on the server. So in preparation, I have set up an Ubuntu 22.04 virtual private server, or VPS. I'm going to log into that now with SSH. Now, before starting recording, I ran a few commands on the server that are quite time-consuming. I'm just going to show them now. Those were running a full update and upgrade, installing Docker, pulling the Docker image that we're going to use, adding my user to the Docker group so I can run Docker commands without sudo, and finally rebooting the machine. So now we have our server set up and with the necessary software installed, we are first going to clone the Git repo from iUse. So this will make a new directory called ERDDAP gold standard. We will change into that directory, and all future commands will be executed from this directory. So we're going to jump straight in and run a Docker command. This is quite long, but it's fairly simple when you look into it. So we're using Docker run, we're specifying a port, which in this case is 8080. Make sure that if there's a firewall on your VPS that you've allowed traffic to port 8080, or you won't be able to see the ERDDAP later. We're then binding a series of configuration files to the Docker container from our host machine so that we can edit those configuration files and the Docker image will take into account those edits. We're giving ERDDAP enough memory to operate, and we're specifying which Docker image to use, which is this image provided by Axiom, which is Docker ERDDAP 2.23, which was the most recent Docker image at time of recording. So we run this command. Docker normally takes about 10 or 20 seconds to load up the ERDDAP server. But then once it's up and running, we just need to go to our web browser. We visit our IP address. Make sure you use the IP address of your server here, not my one. Let me just copy that. So we visit the IP address, port 8080, and we go to /ERDDAP/index. And we see we've already got an ERDDAP up and running with a few basic data sets. However, if I click on the link to view these data sets, see it takes me to localhost. So this Docker image has been set up assuming that you want to run Docker just on your local computer and not exposed to the internet. So we're going to need to make a small change so that all of the links are compiled relative to our server. So I'm just going to cancel that Docker command with Control-C, let the Docker die. If I now go back to that web page and refresh it, there's nothing there because we've shut down Docker, so we've shut down ERDDAP. And we're now going to edit one of those configuration files I talked about. So I'm going to use Vim. You can use whichever editor you're most comfortable with. And the file we want is ERDDAP/conf/config.sh. And the things we need to change are right up the top here. This thing called base URL, that's what's going to be used by Docker in all of the internal links that it makes. So we're just going to delete localhost and replace it with our IP address. Sorry, I misplaced a colon there. So delete localhost, replace it with our IP address. Just going to save that file. And now I'm going to run that same Docker command again. And this time, when the ERDDAP image has spun up, we'll see what a difference that has made. So let's go back to our web page. All right, that's better. We now see that the web page is formatted better because now that we've fixed the internal links, it can find its style sheets, things like that. And now if we click on those data sets, we actually see the data sets. So I can pick any one of these and do the usual ERDDAP things. I'm just going to generate a basic HTML table, and there we see our data. So in the course of a few minutes, we've gone from a fresh Linux machine through to a functioning ERDDAP. Now, what we might want is to add a data set of our own, because ERDDAP comes with a few test data sets, but presumably we're setting up an ERDDAP to serve our own data. So I'm just going to acquire a CSV file here with curl. You could upload your own CSV file if you wished. The important thing is that it goes into the datasets directory. So if now I list this sample CSV file I've added to datasets, I'm just going to have a quick look at it with the head command, head datasets/sample.csv, and we see this is some CTD data. So we've got profile names, longitude, latitude, some temperature, depth, salinity, date time, all we'd need for a nice simple data set. Now, to add a data set to Docker, we need another long Docker command. So the start of this is pretty similar. Docker run, binding a series of directories. At this time, within the Docker image, we're running this command, bash, change directory, web apps, ERDDAP, wedinf, and we're running this generate datasets XML shell script. So let's run that. Okay, this time ERDDAP looks a bit less happy. We've got this Java runtime exception error, and it's telling us you must change flag key in setup.xml. So let's go and do that. Let's find the setup.xml, which is in ERDDAP content. And it's telling us to go for flag key. So let's see if we can find that. Flag key, here we are. So it says you need to change this to your favorite quote. So that we can enter any string or sentence here, as long as it is unique. Save that file, and let's just run that command once more. All right, here we go. So we've successfully run generate datasets, and generate datasets will ask us a series of questions, and then we'll try to generate XML to represent our dataset on ERDDAP. So the first thing it needs to know is what kind of data type are we loading. This is a CSV file, so we just want EDD table from ASCII files. Alternatively, it might be a netcdf or a threads catalog or a dataset. We need to give it a directory. So remember I said that all of our data is stored in this directory called datasets, and we need to give it a file name. We've just got a single file called sample.csv. If we had multiple files, we could use wildcard characters to represent that. There are several more things you can specify here, but for us, the default answer to all of these questions is fine, so we just keep pressing enter. All right. That flashed by there, but it has generated some XML, which is good. It means it's successfully loaded that file. It's seen things like there's a variable here called salt for salinity. It's seen that there is depth and time and longitude. It's successfully kind of worked out that longitude has a valid range of between -180 and 180. So it does this kind of quite intelligent parsing of the files that we give it. But now that we've generated that XML, we need to add that to the big list of data sets which ERDDAP is serving. So those are in another file called datasets.xml. So we're going to take that XML, which has been conveniently saved in a file called ERDDAP logs generate datasets XML out. So if I just do a less of that, we can see that file. And I'm going to copy that file and just append it to the end of the datasets.xml file. And now I'm going to go and edit that file because there are a couple of changes that we need to make. So one thing we need to do is we need to take this final tag, which closes datasets, and we need to put that at the bottom again, because that needs to be the last thing in this file. And then I'm just going to give this dataset a slightly more friendly dataset ID. I'm going to call it sample CTD. And remember that dataset, the dataset ID that you give this, it needs to be unique. It can't be the same as any of the other dataset IDs, but we'll need it later. So let's just save that. Okay, so we've added our dataset to ERDDAP. However, we might want to check that the dataset is valid, because sometimes we can generate chunks of XML that aren't valid on ERDDAP. So there's one more command that we need, which is this DDS command. So that will check our XML to ensure that it's valid and won't cause errors on ERDDAP. So we run that, and DDS only asks one question, which is what is the dataset ID? So we give it sample_CTD, and it will try to read and parse that dataset. And it looks like it's done it successfully. It's telling us that we've got a dataset with some string variables like the scientist's name and the instrument model, and some float variables like latitude, depth, temperature. Great. So we can exit DDS. And now if we go and spin up our ERDDAP server once more with the first ERDDAP command, hopefully we'll see our new data set. All right. So let's go back to the index. And now we see that along with the default data sets, we've got this new one, data from a local source. If we click on that, we see our familiar data set with PSAL, SSAL, scientist name, etc. And we can just run a quick check, and we see if we generate HTML that we see that same data set that we loaded. That's great. There are a few things that could be improved here. For instance, we see that the institution hasn't been set. The data set title, data from a local source, isn't very useful. There's a limit to the sort of metadata that you can have within CSV. So let's improve that. I'm just going to leave ERDDAP running, and I'm going to open a second session on this server. And let's make some changes to that XML. So we're just going to edit this datasets.xml file. Oh, I forgot to change directory. Remember, everything needs to be in this ERDDAP gold standard directory. So let's edit that datasets.xml file. So here we have our dataset with dataset ID, sample CTD. And let's find some extra information to add. Okay, here we are, institution. Let's just give this an institution. And the other thing that was missing was a useful title. So let's call it my CTD data. Very imaginative. Okay, we save that file. We go back to our ERDDAP. We refresh the page, but nothing's changed. The institution is still a set of question marks. The dataset title is still this unhelpful data from a local source. Now, what we could do is I could go back to my running Docker command. I could kill that Docker and then restart it, and that would show the latest information on the web page. But generally, we don't want to have to reboot our Docker every time we make a change. So what instead we do is we use ERDDAP's flag system. So we just need to create a file in the directory called hard flag with the name that corresponds to our dataset ID. So remember, what did we call it? Dataset ID sample_ctd. So I just touch this file here, and that tells ERDDAP that I've made a change to this dataset and I want ERDDAP to reload it right now. Now, if I go back to my web page and refresh it, oh dear, it's not ideal. Yeah, I appear to have broken that. Well, let's do some live debugging, I guess. I guess I must have messed up editing that XML. So let's see. Where did I go wrong? We've got our attributes. We've got subset variables. We've got a summary. Institution. Here it looks like I missed a slash. I must have accidentally deleted that. So let's save that file once more. Touch that flag once more and try reloading this. Okay, that's better. Now we see that it's corrected the title and it's given us an institution. So yeah, the perils of hand editing XML. What I could also have done would have been to run the ds command to see what the mistake was that I made. But yeah, so that's the process of setting up an ERDDAP, adding a data set to it, and making some edits to that data set, which covers about 90% of what you want to do with ERDDAP, all within about 20 minutes. I hope that was useful. In some future videos, we're going to go over some more advanced usage, maintenance, updates to ERDDAP, things of that nature.